we as other mortgage professionals kind of embrace home loans do about this. And, you know, started to think, okay, we can do something here, but we have to be intentional about it. And it led us into start to think about, we can make an impact. And first of all, you know, we have to start to talk about the issues that are going on in this country. And we have to talk about the issues of affordable housing and the issues of race that are in and around all of those things. And, you know, so it led us into to start to think about, we're going to do something about it. And, you know, the first thing we started to do was, okay, let's go talk to a number of different people about what the problems really are, and how they might, how we might shape something that could be impactful. And so we talked to a lot of folks in and around the country who were part of community development corporations, who were part of down payment assistance programs, housing finance agencies, you know, Fannie and Freddie. We talked to them as well. And we said, we're going to do something here. So the first thing we were able to do is, you know, we came out from an embrace side was with a affordable housing product where we waive closing costs. You know, that's a big piece when you start to think about affordable housing is, you know, how do you get closing cost assistance? And so we waived our underwriting fee. Well, that's 1% of a loan, maybe 0.5% of a loan in most areas for affordable housing. And then we kind of went back into housing finance agency space. And then we said the third piece of this is we need a down payment assistance program, but we also need financial literacy. And so we put Wider Path Home together to start to think about those things and how we can make those connections. So with that, I want to hand over to Dennis and have him kind of share his heart and what his thoughts are, why we're doing this. So thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yeah, so it was very interesting point in time last summer before last, right at this point. Yeah, and just what's no doubt the pandemic itself was a phenomenon, but then kind of interesting at why at this point in time do we see showing particular incidences that occurred around the loss of life of a number of individuals that were shockingly lost, that caught the attention of the country and brought attention to just the relationship of racial bias and how it finds its way through law enforcement. And, but also that became a path towards a lot of evaluation. That evaluation started happening here with employees, having conversations and wanting to say what's our response to all of this. And it's been an interesting journey. I think it's for many. It's been an interesting journey for us as a country, but also for a company. And to Brian's point, very much we were examining where do we take responsibility? What can we do? And really, we thought there were two opportunities for us very early on that were quite natural to us, given the business that we're in and what good we could do. One was.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries. It's all. How's this one? Oh, yeah, this one works better. Or at least it's louder. So what we naturally thought we could do was we could create more jobs, or hire more diverse workforce, make efforts to do that. We had found certain challenges, some that were unique to us, some that are pretty common to businesses in terms of how they evaluate and make decisions about hiring. And so we undertook that, but also, quite frankly, we understood that very consistent with our mission, that there was an opportunity for us to create greater home ownership opportunities for people of color. If you go back to our purpose, which is to enrich the lives of our customers, ultimately, and doing that by helping them create a home. And I think we don't really always realize how powerful home ownership is. And not so much, well, it is about owning a home, but it's about what a home is also. So it's about stability of owning a home, but also the fact of having a home. Now, poverty has associated with it trauma. And that trauma leads to sort of an instability emotionally and from a brain functioning standpoint, even with the neuroscience of it all, that forces an individual to be more reactive. And in that reactive state, make certain choices in their lives that are not always in their best interest. We all live through that in some form of way, where we feel unstable, threatened, insecure, and that leads to behaviors on our part that are less than productive relationally, but also in terms of how it might not be for our well-being and our health. Clearly, one of the ways in which you create security is in and around having stability in your life. And there's nothing more stabilizing than a home, a place where you can be secure. And so it's very important that for children and for adults to have that level of order in their life where they can enjoy that level of stability and be in a place having a sense of well-being, in a place of routine, and a place to foster familial relationships and other relationships with friends and community. So home is much more powerful than we, even in the mortgage industry, every day are involved in real estate and the facilitation of home ownership, recognize the power that home represents, enabling it. So too often, we're providing home ownership for people who had a tradition of home ownership. They grew up in places where their home was owned, their family owned a home, and their grandparents owned a home, generation to generation owned homes. There is others in our society, people of color, particularly Black people, who have not had that legacy of home ownership. And that particularly in itself is a destabilizing force amongst people of that race. And if we can create increased numbers of home ownership, we can change lives. We can arrest some of that instability, insecurity, and a propensity towards reactive responses that would make that segment of society have greater opportunity to make better decisions, but also create the wealth needed to have greater choices in life. So it's not only the stability, but it's also wealth creation. So statistically, 74% of all white people enjoy home ownership, whereby only 44% of people who are Black enjoy home ownership. Another interesting statistic, home ownership correlates deeply to wealth creation. A white person is 450% wealthier than that of a Black person on average. And so with that are opportunities that financial resources create. Things like education, things like generationally being able to own a home. Parents very often are involved in supporting down payment assistance for their children in some manner or form. And then starting businesses as an instance. So there's a whole pattern of well-being that's created in and around the creation of a home, both in terms of its wealth aspects, but its emotional aspects and social aspects as well. So, what our intentions are is to drive greater home ownership amongst Black people, particularly Black people, people of color in general, but Black people especially and with great intention in the coming periods. So we've navigated our strategy and our approach, laid some foundations here in 2021, and in 2022, we're going forth with some practical developments in and around helping to develop infrastructure within areas where there's a higher concentration of Black people. And we want to partner with folks who are in those communities who are already giving assistance in some form or another, whether it's in or around helping to generate housing, stable housing for people, or just generally giving care to people. We see that falling into categories from what we can tell to be the faith community, as well as community action type organizations. So we're looking to establish offices in 4 to 5 locations. Some of the possibilities, and likely possibilities, are Baltimore, Washington, D.C., or potentially New York, here in Providence or nearby in Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston, perhaps. And what we'll be doing, sort of strategically, we're thinking that and believing that's important that that's guided, those decisions around those locations are guided by our ability to establish partnerships with again, community-based organizations, and our ability to raise up local workforces from those communities. So we're looking to acquire folks for employment with us, with work, helping to originate mortgage loans, who already live in those communities. So that opens up an opportunity for us as an organization, for you within our organization, to be able to support their development, their onboarding, as well as their success in the mortgage industry. We ultimately want to see ourselves developing a model that is inspirational, that tells a story, that inspires others in the mortgage industry to follow suit. It's very important, we believe, although background, very often, if you look today, and I've talked to many, the structures of what a mortgage company or lender might provide, whether it's a bank's presence or it's a mortgage company's presence, is absent in those communities, as well as realty firms. So all the forces that are needed to kind of enable to help homeownership are not well represented in those communities. Partly because people believe they can't make money there. And so it's not only, it's important that we're there, obviously extending consideration. We've created a grant program through Wider Path that gives down payment assistance. That is actually a gift, a grant, up to $10,000. But independent of that, we believe that, yes, we'll be giving grants, yes, we'll be giving great financial consideration in terms of profitability in many instances to enable homeownership. But we believe that ultimately that'll return many a transaction that are like very normal commercial transactions, and commercial in the sense of that we are able to earn some more typical types of returns on those loans. So we believe that the good we will do in those communities will develop a great deal of goodwill and return a lot of economic opportunities as well. We think that's critical. We think it's critical for the extension of others going into those communities. So we feel a sense of responsibility not only to reach those communities, but doing it with in a commercially viable way. Because if we can demonstrate that that can be done, it'll allow others to follow suit, follow our example. We're going to be happy to share that model as we develop it with others. So part of our vision is to really catalyze. We don't believe that we can make that big of a difference to answer all the needs that are out there. We think we need an industry-wide type of response, and we want to be a catalyst to generate that through pioneering an approach and a model. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dennis. Now I want to introduce another member of our team who's been a longtime friend of mine, sitting next to me is Sarah Hobson. And Sarah and I, along with my wife, we were all in college together many years ago. And, she works in the space of community development in St. Louis. And Dennis and I started having these conversations. She was one of the first people I reached out to. And so we brought Sarah on board to help guide us and help with some of the education pieces of it. And so Sarah's got a few words to share about some of the things that we're doing.
Well, thanks so much for being here, and thank you both, Brian and Dennis, for your comments and for the work that you're doing. Coming from St. Louis, coming from a space of working to advance community-centered development and life opportunities for youth in particular and for families, it just deeply touches me and is such a blessing to me that an entire company would think about how do we reorganize and restructure and build into communities and really work to get to the heart of communities and to connecting housing, education, and financial literacies and down payment assistance and employment and all of the opportunities that we can provide to communities. So it's just been an incredibly rich year. I would like to say that Embrace is 100% serious about putting African American families into homes and Black and Brown and first-time home buyers into homes. The affordable housing product, $38 million has gone already to affordable housing, so lots to celebrate there. And Wider Path Home Foundation, we have our website that has just recently launched, so that is super exciting. You can go to widerpathhome.com. And on that website, what you can find are a whole database of educational resources that our community of practice this year, I want to give a huge shout out to them, the Unknown Stories Community of Practice. They have met weekly for an hour all year. And they not only took time to really learn the stories of African American families and how redlining and displacement and urban renewal and different forces have worked to create a race gap and a generational wealth gap, but they have also intentionally thought strategically about how to connect with African American communities through educational content, such as the videos that you can access now on our Wider Path Home page. And those videos are bring together housing sector folks, so housing counselors, realtors, title companies, loan officers, and they really just explain how the mortgage industry works and the whole homeownership process. So they are videos that are ready for everybody to just share with your clients that you're working with, people who might be far off from homeownership. You can share the videos and help them understand where they are in the process and what the whole overview of the process looks like, so they know what they're walking into. There's just a lot of good information there. And the other part that they've been a part of is that they have been deepening our engagement in communities like Baltimore, and they have worked to establish relationships with housing counselors and with community development corporations. And so you can see on Wider Path, under our resources tab, you can see our partners who you can donate to their organizations. We also have their events posted on our website. You can share their events. We have now all of our social media set up for Wider Path, so you can also be a part of sharing, checking into Instagram or to Facebook or YouTube or what am I missing? LinkedIn, and you can share our posts from Wider Path and the events that we're putting out. So lots of different ways to be involved in this work, and would just also just like to share a couple of stories that I think are pretty exciting from the rewards, the fruit of the labor of this particular community of practice. They are making inroads in African American communities in exciting ways. In Maryland, Scott Phillips and Guy Silas, both branches are selling 20% of their loans to African American families. They have, for Scott, at least 10% of his loans are going towards that affordable housing program or towards first-time home buyers, but there's GMI information on 30% that hasn't been identified, so it's probably more. And I also just want to lift up Audley Lewis, who is a loan officer in Hampton Roads, Virginia. He is so much the heart of this work and of what we've been able to accomplish. He's a very faith-driven man, and he has prayed over our work, and he has walked with me just absolutely so closely and supported me every step of the way and supported our team every step of the way. But he's also just a living example of being embedded in a community. 95% of his home loans go to African American families. 58% of those loans are government loans, and 33% are conventional loans, and 6% are bond loans. So he is making a tremendous impact in his community. And the cool thing about Audley is, especially during the pandemic and things that he had to kind of stop and take off of his plate and all of that, he and our loan officers are finding that just simply by talking about Wider Path Home Foundation and by having partnerships with local community development corporations or housing counselors, that realtors, Black realtors, are finding them. And they're saying, oh, here's some of our clients. Can you work with our clients? We trust you. And so they're growing in their diverse partnerships, and they're growing in their capacities to work with first-time home buyers. They have the educational resources to point them to, but they also have housing counselors to help first-time home buyers fix their credit or fix their budget or whatever it is that they need. And so they have this nice little circle of, they receive a first-time home buyer, they work with them, and then they pass them to the Community Development Corporation, and then the Community Development Corporation, when they're ready, passes them back to the loan officer. So that circle has actually increased business for Audley and for our loan officers in pretty exciting ways, and help them embrace and reach a broader audience, which has been super exciting. To close, Audley shared this story with me the other day, that a young man who was in his 20s came to work with him, and his salary was, somewhere around $36,000. And Audley just got in there with him, and that's what Audley does. Audley, he just gets in there with you. He just knows your story. He knows how to plug in and how to encourage. And he just got in there with this young man, and he said, let's talk about your credit history. What's going on? And he just got into it with him, and he figured out that there was one little thing that this young man could fix in his credit. And so we helped him understand how to fix that and how to get connected to the housing counselors. And this young adult at $36,000 a year is now in a home. And Audley shepherded him through that process and put him in a home that would be a good situation for him. And I just want to say that, when we take time, and that's really what the loan officers have reported, is that it's just so deeply satisfying to take time out of their busy days to talk to people who might not be in a home for 5 years, right? But they just build a relationship, and they just find out what their needs are. And they just get that personal satisfaction of, I helped somebody who homeownership wasn't even necessarily a reality for them until I took that time to tell them, you are worthy of a home. And so this young man, because Audley has taken that time with him, now is on a whole different path to generational wealth building than he might have been otherwise. And every single one of those loans that we make to African-American families, especially the first-time home buyers, that's the path that we set people on. And, it's actually very profitable, because Audley is $2.5 million over his sales, where he was at the end of last year right now. And he's still going, right? And so each of our branches, what we're seeing is that first-time homeowners are finding our loan officers. And we're finding that people are becoming excited about Embrace because they trust us. They see that we see and want to work with anybody, right? Especially lower income families, and to help them find the satisfaction and the joy of homeownership that Dennis referenced. And that makes us trustworthy in a whole nother set of ways that we can't even possibly imagine. That means that our loan officers are also expanding their pipelines and working well with a much broader and more diverse community. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, Embrace, for the work that you're doing on behalf of many, many communities. And if you'd like to learn more about how to get involved, feel free to follow up with me. We have a next community of practice coming next week, and I can tell you more about that. And I'll follow up with an email as well. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. I love your excitement. Obviously, you're a little bit passionate about these items. So that's an awesome piece of this. And also reach out to Audley Lewis. He'll tell you his story, and he'll tell you the work that he's doing in Hampton Roads. And it's, as Sarah shared, it's a great story. Both from a production standpoint and from a life fulfillment standpoint as well. It's just tremendous work that's going on down there. And so now we're gonna go over to our main event today. We're gonna have a couple compliance guys speak, but they're going to be really exciting, and I think this is a really important topic for us. Dennis shared that number, that 30% difference in home ownership rates amongst Black Americans versus White Americans, and there's some story behind this. And unfortunately, part of that is this definition of redlining. And so we're going to two guys speak today. One is a new friend that I made this morning. And then Tom, I hope I get your last name right, Tom Pinkewish. Tom is a longtime mortgage veteran. He was an underwriter at one point in time and has worked his way into consulting, publishing. I believe you got a book or two maybe out there that you've worked on, and spends a lot of time talking and sharing about compliance and about other things that kind of go in and around all those things. And then we also have Ben Schmara, who for a lot of you, you maybe seen his name, now you get to see him on a camera. Some of you may have, things that you don't say very nicely, but Ben's a good guy and is very thoughtful in what's going on and the things that are going on in Brace from a compliance perspective. But, Ben's our director of legal affairs and regulatory affairs. He's also our in-house counsel. And these guys are going to share a little bit about redlining. So thank you guys.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for turn it down here. For the invitation. I really enjoyed hearing about your different initiatives and partnerships. It is exciting what you're doing. I think Embrace is so far ahead of the curve on many of what other lenders are doing in this area. So we have we developed a very kind of large, thorough presentation on redlining because it's a combination of understanding what the history has been, what it's done today, and where it's going. We're not going to cover all the slides in here in detail. We're going to skip through and pick out the highlights on each one as well. But one of the goals here is to make it interactive as well. And you see the presentation goal says redlining, knowledge awareness. We're going to start and make sure we have a common platform of understanding what redlining means to me, to you. It can vary. What it can mean to an examiner, what can it mean to the corporation, the company Embrace as well. And it's partly based on your experiences. So we're going to discuss that for a little bit. We're kind of working into making it useful, into action. That's a common theme that you've talked about as far as helping people. Yes, I've been on the lending side, the credit side, very objective. You were taught to be objective and analytical, but the words I heard here is kind of you deserve to have. There's emotion behind affecting change in communities that have not had the opportunities, whether it's Black communities or other racial communities who have been denied access, and there's inequality. So that's a change in the way we have to look at as lenders, objective lenders, is to try to incorporate that. And today's program is one step in that direction that you can develop over time with your partnerships and with your training and everything else. Leading to that, so handling inquiries, doing things like that, that's to help you recognize situations maybe that you come across on your day-to-day jobs. And the third part, personal job aid, that type of stuff, we're trying to help you respond in a more consistent way, maybe a more empathetic way, and in a way that will help support the culture and the goals of Embrace. Slide, please. So if you looked at the overview of the different topics we have here, again, we start off kind of with a more academic, this is what it's about. We get into what you can do or what you can do as far as recognizing or behaviors you can have. And then we'll have some Q&A in there. Again, this is interactive. So as I start talking, based on your experiences, you don't all work here your whole career. You've come from different areas. I came from a community banking area, which is closest to, I'd say, what your culture is like here. The strict mortgage banker may be a little more sterile, a little more objective, but certainly just in the name of your organization, Embrace, you're really reaching out and being proactive and getting yourself involved. Community banks did the same thing. Well, for a bit about that, where we always thought we were doing the right thing, but as I learn from what's happening today, and look back, we had 35% market share, the two banks that were in our town. That's pretty inclusive. But if I look back into what percentage of all that was going to low mod, Black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, which is about the full length of diversity we have, it wasn't quite as high as you'd want it to be. But back then it was you had different information, you had a different culture. Those types of being satisfied with those goals are out the door. And again, where your company is going on your own is ahead of the curve of what other people are trying to achieve. Okay, so think of your experiences prior to Embrace that you might think might be redlining, or maybe just when you go back to your communities or people who you've spoken to, your customers or just friends. So just think if there's anything you can share later on that. Okay, we're good. And now when we get into the real knowledge part of it, I'll hand it back to Ben.
All right. Thanks, Tom. I'm okay to sit down. Do I have to stand up in this particular spot? This right here? No, here, lower down? No, okay. All right, so redlining is a type of discrimination where a lender avoids a particular area or provides lesser products or higher rates to a particular area because that area has a higher population of minority residents. I want to stress that redlining, like any type of fair lending requirement or like commitment that we're making, it's not a defensive thing. It requires an affirmative commitment on the part of a lender to make redlining, to avoid redlining, or to avoid any kind of fair lending problems. It's not, the old way of thinking about it was, hey, I don't discriminate. The only color I see is green. Really, you're ignoring the fact that as a lender, we have a heightened obligation to take affirmative actions to avoid disparate treatment, disparate, unequal, unfair provision of our services. So just keep that in mind when we talk about redlining. Next slide, please.
So the source of redlining, where did it start? Surprisingly, you could argue it was with the federal government itself. It was part of the policy, one part of the policy of, I have to read this, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, where they would were responsible for taking care of certain homes in different areas, and they would highlight areas that represented a higher risk to them. And up there you see the residential security map, A, first grade, second, third, fourth, and of course when you get to fourth, you're into yellow, then red. So this is kind of where it started, the term anyway. The practice could have been all throughout, and I think Sarah actually has a paper or something where she outlines it from when we first came over here, not we, but when people first came over to America. But in this situation related to housing, you have, redlining starting there. And if you read in there, it says, the second bullet, FHA is created, takes position that underwriting manual and incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. I mean, that's pretty clear, isn't it? And you read this today and say, oh my God, that's ridiculous. But this is where it was at the time. And of course, if the FHA was doing it, then municipalities, everyone else, with that as a background or justification, can reinforce that type of an approach. And it's interesting, later on we'll show where, I guess, at the outset, when neighborhoods were identified with this type of a red or a yellow group, and in that zone, it's interesting to see what those neighborhoods have evolved to today. And that has a really good example later on.
So just to make it clear, a neighborhood with a high population of minority residents was flagged as red. That's where the term redlining comes in.
Thanks. Excellent, please.
All right, so then we had some efforts at reform. So just like Tom explained, we had this practice start up in the 1930s and continue on throughout, from the federal level to FHA to local um, um, restricted covenants. And then the 1960s started to see a change. After the assassination of MLK, you had the Civil Rights Act, which passed the Fair Housing Act, which attempted to prohibit this practice. You also started to see in the 70s states take deliberate actions to actually outlaw redlining. So you see how this started to take a trend there. So from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, late 60s, 70s, it started to turn a little bit. Next slide, please.
I think Dennis spoke to this as well. The destructive impacts of disparity in wealth, of poverty, or of really having limited access to financial services. You know, if you look at it more broadly, these neighborhoods have had a difficulty getting fair access to all financial services. Specifically today, we're focused on finance and being able to purchase a home, getting the information, the education, you know, the accessibility to experts. If you think back all the way until almost 20 years ago, you had to get to a branch location to get this information. You didn't have online. Many people, and most people didn't use a phone, but if that was the only option, yeah, you could do that. But when you're starting in the 30s, if there wasn't a branch or an expert there, you weren't getting that information. So that's one of the, this leads into the next slide, but it's also one of the impacts of that. You pop back up, sorry. So that's, the long-term impact. If you can't get access and have more financial information, more sophistication, how are you going to come up with down payment? Quality of life outcomes, which again are long-term impacts. There's sustained poverty. You may not be able to access different employment and earn at that level that you need to own your own home. There are other issues that you're dealing with day to day, raising a family. So these are the destructive impacts of not having access to all the financial services as well as financing. So as this first bullet says, many of the neighborhoods marked hazardous, as Ben pointed out in the 30s, are still today more likely than other areas to comprise lower income minority residents. But their situation for people in those areas has not changed. Yeah. There will be some successes, but would we consider this a success where we've evolved yet? And I think most people agree no. And hopefully with this next round of how people are viewing more affirmative action on the responsibility of lenders, whether they be banks, credit unions, mortgage bankers, adding that affirmative action aspect to it, that maybe will be the activating factor that will make some change. Okay, that's good. Yep. Next slide, please.
So I think that an example is a lot more interesting to talk about than some of these cold stats. So we pulled up Macon, Georgia. And Macon, Georgia was one of the cities in the 1930s that had the greatest percentage of its area redlined. So it has the greatest percentage of its neighborhoods that had minority residents living there to a level where they were redlined, which is 64.99% if you're curious. Today, so these are numbers from just 2 years ago. This is today. Flash forward from 1937 to 2020. 91% of the red line neighborhoods are inhabited by mostly minorities. 73% are LMI. White persons remain the overwhelming majority in Macon neighborhoods that had not been redlined. You have 35% of African Americans in Macon, Georgia, who live below the poverty line compared to 13% of whites. Could you flip this slide? Because we actually pulled a few years ago, there was a big project. I forget which community group did it, but They took these old HOLC maps from the 30s and overlaid them over modern census maps. So you could really see how things had not changed. So what you're seeing here is old 1930s red line map overlaid with where there's dots on the map is where there's currently today low to moderate income area. So you'll see blue areas look pretty good, but the red areas mostly are still LMI, and you can see how the argument is that this expands out nearby. So below is LMI, or if you go above some of these blue areas, you don't see the same, you see upper income. If you flip to the next slide, see the impact on minority populations. So once again, this is the old red line map from the 30s, overlaid with current census data on where you have majority minority residents, which is a census tract where there's the majority of the population are minorities. And you see redlined high minority populations. And then you see, for the most part, the blue and yellow and greens, predominantly white populations. So that it's stark when you start looking at these maps, how little things have changed in 100 years. Yep. Next slide, please. Any questions on the Macon, Georgia example? Okay. All right. We have 15 minutes, so I'm not going to cover this too much, but I just wanted to point out that where you don't just see redlining in mortgage banking, you also have it in other cases. Recently, you had allegations against Staples, Home Depot, and other organizations where they were varying their pricing available based on geographic location. Next slide, please. Everybody loves the cartoon, right? Can anybody read a cartoon? I'm not sure. It was harder even for me when I was putting this on there. So in my circles, the legal compliance folks worry that the rise of targeted online marketing presents a risk of what they call digital redlining. The point I really wanted to make to you is I see the opposite. Of course, there are risks there, but I think that targeted online marketing actually has holds the promise to combat historic redlining to a large extent. It's like you see in this cartoon where with the dog saying to the other, nobody knows you're a dog when you're online. And if you just flip to the next slide, please. Anybody know anything about the Sears Roebuck catalog? Probably not. There's a really strong analogy here from the promise that digital online marketing has for us in this fair lending problem, the old Sears Roebuck catalog. So if it's flip to the next slide, please. You could read through this and see somebody else's explanation of it. But in short, what the Sears Roebuck came out with a long time ago was they came out with a way for people to shop for different services and products, regardless of where you were from. To a large extent, it equalized, or not equalized, but it helped minority populations obtain these things they couldn't otherwise get. When they were in a neighborhood where they couldn't shop for different products or services, the Sears Roebuck catalog was held out as a way for them to get around that and get the same sort of pricing products that other people could. Tying into the cartoon of the dog. Any questions on that? Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, this again, Sears is a company none of you played into, but going back to historically, I mean, Black people could not go into retail stores; they would go into certain areas, ever, not just certain times in different places. So that allowed a tremendous amount of access for Black people to get certain things at a reasonable price, et cetera, et cetera.
Just add on too, in a redlined area, you didn't have the same types of stores and retail presence because people weren't able to build the equity or the wealth the surrounding area were able to.
Yeah, and that leads into, there are other examples of that. But, so when, whether they intended it or not, there's certainly that the effect of mailing in orders and delivering just transformed people's quality of life, you know, who formerly could not access that stuff. So we wanted to segue into, you know, that's a too brief and too kind of curtailed overview of kind of what redlining has been or done, or examples of it over the past. So let's move a little bit into something more useful for you. I warned you I was going to ask you a question and ask for some feedback. So in this slide here, I can only pick on the people in the room. So this is you get to see me in person, so that's great. So you get to volunteer and give us a little feedback on this. So here we have a couple activities, and this is setting up what's coming. So which of the following activities might contribute to redlining? Why do you think they do? And why do you think, well, no, that doesn't really mean redlining. It doesn't mean it's discriminatory. And the first one is, okay, a loan officer not returning calls from a community group in a certain area. We'll call it a low mod income or an area of high minority concentration. So if a loan officer doesn't return a call to a community group, is that redlining? Any thoughts? See a nod, but I want to hear a voice. Multiple calls, just avoiding. All right, what if you go to 2 community groups? 3. What's the number where it's from just like a bad LO to and if you think this LO isn't returning calls to a certain community group in a certain area, do you think that LO may not be doing other activities in that area? Not reaching out, not doing home buyer education programs, not doing financial. So you see where I'm going with this, right? It's, if you erase the message by mistake and you don't return the call, that's not redlining. Typically, a comment is not accepted. So as a lender, you want to make sure you have a number of activities in place so that states or certain individuals don't, I guess, speak for your whole organization. You're demonstrating in many different ways, different actions. All right, so that's a little bit about personal behavior. What about the next one? An advertisement containing, and you've heard this for fair lending, right? Discrimination, not redlining, discrimination. Suburban family, maybe they're all white people in the ad, doctors, whatever. If there's one ad, is that a problem? Or if there's a series, you go picking around here, certain marketing areas around here were more affluent suburban areas where their jumbo loans are, which you love to do, but because, not because you are adverse to anybody else, they're just more profitable with the same amount of time. Again, if you're looking at it from a green point of view, is this where you want to market and get all your loans? Will you make your numbers? The answer is yes, but what do you think about an advertisement that just focuses on that? Right? Or if this is what you do everywhere, the pattern in practice. And this kind of leads into what Ben's going to describe as some current situations where this is, attorneys use a term, an abundance of caution. I've never heard this, incredible. Well, this is an abundance of evidence to support what may be going on with me. So I'll turn it back to Ben.
Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so this wasn't intended, or it's not going to be a compliance presentation, but it's not like you can go and get public data on how other companies are redlining currently, other than, as are described in allegations and public enforcement actions. So we're going to look through a couple of recent enforcement actions to see the kind of behavior that's occurring at other institutions, to understand how you see redlining pop up in the modern age. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm going to skip the next 2 slides too, Tom. Yes. All right. Yep, so we'll stop right there. So here's a list of redlining red flags. They're pretty technical. Put them up there just for a quick discussion. Anything jump out to anybody there? Anything make a lot of sense or no sense at all? Again, these are really a list from my perspective as a legal regulatory. This is what an examiner might have on their checklist. So they're pretty common sense, right? If you have no branches in any majority minority areas, that seems pretty bad. Really the key indicator in redlining is applications. Once we get applications in the door, we process applications. The trick with redlining at institutions, mostly these days, is getting them in the door to begin with. So the number one bullet point there is the number one consideration from a redlining standpoint. How many apps are you getting from different areas? All right, next slide, please. So this is one of a couple recent actions that we wanted to talk about. CFPB took action against a small Chicago lender named Townstone. Now, at any given time, they had 3 to 5 loan officers, not a major operation. They operating primarily in the Chicago area. Now, Chicago, as you may not be surprised to hear, is not 90% upper white class white persons. Chicago is pretty diverse. Chicago is about 30% African American, and between 2014 and 2017, August is the next slide. Just to the next slide for a second, please. So Chicago is 30% African Americans, but Townstone from 2014 to 2017 took 34 applications from African Americans, 1%. So you can see how this starts with statistics. Yeah, that's right. So you could visually just notice the issue there, right? That just jumps out to you. Right. It looks like they're kind of dancing around this. Now, compared to their peers, they took 2% of applications from majority minority census tracts, where their peers took applications 8%. So that's another way to highlight the concern there. Now, so from a redlining standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, this is really all you need to know. A lender, just for its own business sense of ethics, wants to do better than this. But if you flip back to the last slide, the CFPB did have some theories on why this occurred. One of the more inflammatory was this lender was involved in some sort of public radio show, and they took a lot of pretty inflammatory stances. And I put a few up there just on the board, so January 2017, the CEO on public radio described the certain part of Chicago being a scary place and called it the jungle jewel. June of 2016, they said that they referred to the South Side of Chicago as a hoodlum weekend, and said the police are the only ones between that turning into a real war zone and keeping where it's at. November 2017, one of the officers compared going through the South Side to skydiving, given the danger of it. Now, what the CFPB said was not that these comments alone didn't constitute redlining. Redlining is on the fact of the matter, and the applications taken or not taken. But the theory of the case is that these comments discourage people in those areas from coming to that institution, among a lot of other things. You can leave it there, that's fine. Yeah, so I think the way I wanted to explain it is that redline, that's redline. That's really all you need to know. If you're a lender operating at that size and scale, you got to do better than that. There's 1,000 ways to get better than that. You could A, not have comments like that on public radio. B, you could have better marketing directed at those efforts. You could hire loan officers who are better able to reach those populations, those areas. You could come up with things that I can't even think of to do that. I think the point of the matter is that really proofs in the pudding. So that's fair to say. I think to add something. Next slide, please. All right, one more at least, and it's 1:15. Start wrapping this up a bit. Another really interesting recent enforcement action was out of Buffalo, New York, against a company called Hunt Mortgage Company. Now, pretty similar to Chicago, except for this was a state action, not a federal action. And once again, yeah, Buffalo, New York is 50% Hispanic and or African American. But you see there, we had over the 2016, 2019, the lender took only 4.7% of its applications from African American or Hispanic borrowers, and reached only 2.21% of its applications came from majority minority census tracts. So I'm not going to go through the reasons and why that occurred, why the regulators think that might have occurred. It doesn't really matter. If it matters, it's the fact is it happened. The time we have, I think that's. Any questions, comments, thoughts, objections, encouragement, jokes? Going once, going. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, we're curtailing this a bit. This is the same kind of question. What do you think? What makes it redlining? I think it's pretty clear from the prior examples that the first example is not good. If it's a pattern or practice like the CFPB established for Townsend, that starts to support a concerted effort. If it's just an individual on a bad day, it's not going to be an enforcement action. But what I wanted to broaden again and make it more real to you is the second example is not out in the public; it's in the production area. And I've experienced this as an underwriter over the decades. When you had a low mod property or an FHA loan, which typically needed a lot of work, as an underwriter, you really, as they would say, sharpen your pencil. You don't use a pencil anymore. But you would really look at that property, look at it again. And the appraisals would have language in there saying run down, neighborhood, lack of attention, things like that. So they're painting a picture for you. And you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do a 98% LTV or a 100% LTV or whatever. So it works its way into the system in the process once an application does come in. Next slide, please. So this next quick example is now at the prior to application area. Again, not beating on LOs today, but another reason why you may not get the amount of volume you'd like is from behavior that you might see from this. And Liberty Bank, as a background, has been an outstanding community bank in the state for decades and had a very high reputation. But something like this happened even at a bank that had very good compliance. I mean, I served on the Affordable Housing Committee with retail lending for a decade. They're very committed to affordable housing and diversity and everything. But next slide, we'll see what one employee can do and what can happen. So I'll summarize the first area. A community group sent in 2 testers, one white, one minority. And the bottom line of section 115 is they were getting different treatment from the same LO. Basically, the same house, the LO perceived it differently, presented objections, discouragement of that house to the minority applicant, tester. Didn't do it, same thing for the white tester. On the second line says, LO made 2 efforts to steer the tester to another town. Now, I happen to be from Bristol, Connecticut, and it is more diverse.
there could be a few reasons why that person did it. But when you add in the first part, the third part is just basically factual. And then the yellow suggested a discount program that he was ineligible for. So if he applied for that program, he'd probably get denied. So these two people with the same home and set up to have the same experience, financials would have completely different experience and probably a different outcome. So this is even maybe before, maybe the minority applicant wouldn't even apply and walk away saying, forget it, not gonna happen. So that's all the way throughout the process this can happen. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, so this is set up pretty much, I think, for on your own, you can go through and start to develop. We've highlighted some examples, but if you were going to come up with like a job aid or a training guide for yourself or for the company, these are some principles which, quite frankly, every time I come here, I love it. I don't know an organization that not just has stated their principles, but has, I think, so aggressively communicated them and well to communicate them to the consumer. I'm just walking in and I'm walking away knowing who you guys are. Right? I work for great organizations, but we were never this active and outreaching and welcoming, embrace what we want to do for you. So if we went through all these, we would try to come up with behaviors or actions that you would do and practice on yourselves or developing your management, where it's, how can I make sure I give a consistent level of service, unlike the example we just showed you at Liberty, at an LO at Liberty, not at Liberty per se. So that's really the next several slides. And again, because of time, we'll kind of go through that. And do you have any final comments before we get questions? Okay. So any questions about what we presented? And again, apologies for the things we didn't do. You've been a lovely audience. Thank you so much. Hold on.
Thank you so much for thank you so much for your presentation, just for painting the picture of redlining and how it works. And it's just striking me just how inequalities are so related. That the actions of federal government and of industries that literally built their business model outside of Black and brown communities, that set in motion wealth building for generations, that gave white people land and capital and housing and everything that they needed, while taking it in a certain sense from African American communities and Black communities who literally were left out and written out of the equation. And then we're set on a different trajectory in terms of wealth building or in terms of and have overcome generations of innovation and resilience and have worked to overcome everything that hasn't set in motion. But it's a hard battle, right? And how much more we can do as a company, and how exciting it is to be a part of a company that is doing its part in a major way. So just thank you so much for being that mentor for us. It's really powerful.
Thank you, guys. We really appreciate your time, your thoughtfulness in and around this topic. I think it's really important for all of us. Obviously, it's important as an organization, race, and then obviously as a foundation to get some message out. Obviously, some of this data, as I was going through this last summer, really brought my eyes to like, wow, there's a problem. And that's the beginning of this understanding there's a problem. And what are we going to do to deal with it? And so that's kind of my pitch here as we wrap up time. So what are we going to do for those in the room, those online? There's opportunities to be able to serve. We have a great ability here at Embrace to support nonprofits, and obviously we have one. It's someone in-house. So if you're interested, we're waiting for the federal government to give us our 501c3 We've applied for it. It's been waiting since March. Once we have that, we will be live to be able to start to get grants out to folks to be able to get, homeowners into homes, and we really are encouraging black communities to do that. And so if you're interested in supporting that, and obviously you don't have to be an LO to be able to support this. There's kind of a whole back office piece of it. It is an application process to be able to get the grant. We have to review those applications. We had a few test runs, and I reviewed those applications and was trusting that our underwriters and rates were doing the right thing. But we're going to need some support to be able to do that. There's all kinds of other pieces. There's technical support. If you're an IT type person, our marketing team, led by Megan, can always use it as support. If you're a new webinar expert, we definitely get you. So there's plenty of opportunities. And then the last opportunity that is really there is with Sarah. She's starting a new community of practice. And so if you're interested in that, reach out to myself or Sarah. And our emails are on the website, and we'd love to talk to you about it. Even if you're just interested, just call me, and we'll have a conversation about it. We would just love to see everybody just doing their one piece. And you think about it, and Steve is in the room. See, how many retail loan officers do we have? 200. I think what do we have, about 50 direct to consumer, maybe. Yeah. And I think we covered 20 verified. So you think about each loan officer does one more loan, right? To black corruption. What does that look like? Right. And then you have conversations about that, and then that multiplies in the next quarter. Those are some significant numbers and significant impact that you can have on families. And so I just leave with that challenge of what can you do? What's the thing you can do to help make a difference with this problem? Thank you for joining today, and we look forward to next event, which will be the first Wednesday of November. We'll have another event, and we'll be talking about kind of the wealth gap that's been as a result of this problem. A little bit talk about today. So thank you very much. Made it through. We're on time. John. Thank you, Chris. Take some food to your friends, to your family.